This is a clip from a bonus episode of the Poisons and Pestilence Podcast. Why not come and check us out? We're available on all major players.
In about September 1917, one of the officers of the British Gas Services Directorate in France, in a place called Saint-Omer in France, is kind of pondering on this chemical. And he takes a pinch of the Blue Cross chemical that the Germans include in their shells, this arsenic, and he puts it on the stove.
This is another story of British ingenuity.
Exactly.
I'm sorry to stop you, but this seems to be a recurrent theme, not only in the history of chemical warfare, of someone going, right then.
Well, yeah, I wonder what will happen if I put this highly toxic arsenic on the stove in my room.
I mean, I think it's just pre-Netflix. So, I mean, it was this or reading a book in the dark. So I guess it was obviously what are you going to do in a hotel room? You've got a Bunsen burner.
Exactly. There was nothing to do in the evening. I was bored. I opened up a German gas shell and I put the contents on my stove.
So we're in Saint-Omer, and it's Henry Sisson. Is that? Oh, I've said that correctly.
Yeah, Henry Sisson. Yeah.
They put a pinch of this stuff
on
the stove,
and it produces this smoke, and the smoke is so toxic, but it's actually so painful. It causes this pain to the sinuses. It causes choking and coughing. That it causes not only he has to leave the room, but it causes the evacuation of the entire building.
Brilliant.
Just from a pinch of this smoke. His boss, who is Charles Fulks, who is in charge of the British Offensive Chemical Warfare Programme, Fulks immediately sees that this could be the way to really use this chemical, not in the kind of rather clumsy way that the Germans have been trying to kind of pulverize it by blowing it up so you get a very fine dust that goes in a gas mask, because the British knew that the dust wasn't fine enough to really work. Instead of trying to make it into a dust, you make it into a smoke. By heating it, you've really got an effective weapon. And they tried their own gas mask, even with the add-on filter, in this smoke, and the smoke penetrated it, and the wearer, anyone wearing the mask, had to tear it off immediately, because of the choking. It's so great. So they've got the Holy Grail with this smoke, and the Holy Grail is the chemical that will penetrate your enemy's gas mask. The M device has been developed very much with the problem of the Western Front in mind. It's been developed as a weapon that can be used in a theatre of war where the prevailing wind is westerly, so the prevailing wind is blowing from the west to the east, conveniently towards the Germans, and it's also a theatre of war which is sort of open agricultural farmland. It's been cleared of its thick forests many centuries before. So the question is whether they take it to Russia is kind of moot, because it's a completely different theatre of war. And so they ask the War Office, when they've told Ironside, Archangel, yes, use chemical weapons, Ironside says, okay, I'd like this, this, and this. I'd like the Livens projector, I'd like the Stokes mortar, etc. I'd like gas shells for the 4.5-inch howitzer, etc. And the Royal Office say, okay, we're going to send you some of those, but we're going to send you a new weapon. It's a new gas, and it's very secret, and you should only use it if you really, really have to, because it's our special secret weapon. And he replies and saying, okay, well, that's great. How does it work in a country where it's really thickly wooded and there's not much wind? And basically the War Office says, okay, we'll get back to you on that. And they say, okay, we're going to send out an expert who will advise you on this. And the expert is actually a very experienced special brigade officer. This is the officers that were carrying out British gas attacks, who has also been very closely involved in this 1918 development at home. He had to leave France because he'd inhaled a lot of chlorine gas as part of his service. It had affected his health. So he's the perfect expert on this weapon, and he really believes, well, he believed that it could have won the war. So he's eager for an opportunity to use it. He's about to go out to Russia. This is in March of 1919, and he has an accident it gets run over by a taxi in London. So he can't go out. So the War Office ends up sending 50,000 of the M device thermogenerators out to Ironside in May of 1919 without having checked whether it will actually work in North Russia. And of course, this whole question of the country and the fact that it doesn't work in a thickly wooded area, really, it kind of got missed. And there's also a real problem in that one of the people who were advising in the Ministry of Munitions claims to know the area around Archangel, and says, I'm going to quote you what he says. He says, artillery is not likely to be much good. There's far too much forest, but gas would, I think, drift along very nicely. And he's just like 100% wrong, this guy, Sir Keith Price. July 1919, Thomas Davies, he's the expert. He's recovered from his being run over by the taxi. He arrives in North Russia, and he's got 19 other officers, many of which he's worked closely with already before in France on the Western Front, who are all specialist gas attack officers. And they arrive, and he goes out to look at the area, look at the countryside, and assess whether he can use the M device and what other chemical weapons he can use. And he finds that, yes, actually it is thickly wooded, and that just the whole area is these thick forests. And literally the only places where there aren't forests are where there are little villages, where obviously there are people living, civilians living, and also where railway lines have been driven down. So running north from Archangel, there's a railway line, and running north from Murmansk, there's a railway line. And you've got literally 30-meter wide strips that have been cleared through the trees. And the fighting actually follows these fronts. It follows what they call the railway front down from Archangel, and it also follows rivers as well. So you've got the river fronts and the railway fronts.
So it's exactly opposite how it was field trialed, the kind of setup.
Yeah.
And all we have so far is a kind of vague reassurance from we assume a quite plummy sounding officer class gentleman who went, it'll be fine. I have a sense of these things.
The battalion commander of the 2nd Hampshires, who is a very formidable personality, John Sherwood Kelly, is won the Victoria Cross on the Western Front, basically writes a letter to Ironside refusing to use the M device. He says these raids are unnecessary. There's no point. We don't need to raid the Bolsheviks. We've got, prisoners coming in, giving us information about, their strength and all that sort of thing. He sees through this raid, and he realizes it's just an excuse to try out the chemical weapon. And he says he's not going to let his men be subjected to that. So he has to be replaced. So it's kind of things very quickly unravel. And Davies also just realized after several weeks that it's not going to work. The wind is non-existent. And if you've got a non-existent wind, you can't use a chemical weapon that's wind dependent. And this kind of exposes the fatal flaw of the M device. The use in its sort of conventional method, if you like, with the infantryman chucking it and allowing the wind to drift it forward, fails. So Davies has got to find another way of using it. And he's undeterred. He's really determined to use this weapon. He believes that it's got a big potential. So he starts modifying the M devices to turn them into bombs that he can drop out of aircraft, because he thinks, okay, if I haven't got the wind, then I'll drop them directly onto the Bolsheviks so that we don't have to worry about the wind. And he starts designing fins and like a nose cone, padded nose cone, so that they can drop them out of the aircraft without the generators being damaged. And his servant, so officers, all army officers have a servant, and in the Royal Engineers, all sappers have a trade. They all have a particular skill. His servant happens to be a plumber, so he can make things out of tin plate. He can make things out of metal. So his servant starts manufacturing the fins, but then Davies finds that the Royal Air Force in Archangel refused to allow their aircraft to be used for testing out these rather dangerous gadgets. So he has to go to Ironside. Ironside overrules them, and he gets the trials. Then, after they make about 20 flights, trying out the different designs, and they're using the real thing, chucking out these thermo generators, trying to avoid the civilians around the villages. They crash. He crashes and has quite nasty injuries. He cuts his arms and he gets the arsenic, the DM, into the wounds, causing nasty eruption. So anyway, the RAF now say, "No, we told you this is a stupid idea," and Davies is still not deterred. So anyway, they carry on, and eventually he does perfect his bomb, and he gets workshops in Archangel, military workshops and naval workshops, to make up the bombs. Eventually, they do make 1,500 of these bombs that he's designed. So he's designed a working aircraft bomb. So he's in fact almost, not quite by accident, but he's changed sort of British government policy. He has created a working aerial chemical weapon in the field, and Ironside gives him the go-ahead to use it, and they plan to use it on the next attack, 10th of August 1919, on this railway front at Archangel. And his main problem when he's all set to use the weapon in August 1919 is the weather. And in fact, the weather's too bad for flying. And this is a constant anyway. So it's not just chemical weapons that are weather dependent. It's it's flying as well. So bad weather goes on for a couple of weeks. So it's not till the end of August that they can use them, and they drop them, and they're incorporated into an attack. It's an attack by Russian anti-Bolshevik forces that the British have organized and equipped. But there are British forces attacking with them, but it happens to be Russian forces. And they drop approximately 60 at a go. The airmen report that you get a good cloud of smoke. The town they drop them on gets obscured by smoke. They can see panicked troops running into the surrounding woods. And they repeat it the next day, another 60 or 70 on each target. And they find that they can capture the positions after they've gassed them. And the initial uses are successful. And that sets a pattern really for the ensuing weeks of the campaign. Davies organizes very detailed questioning of any prisoners he can find. And this is very much the way that Special Brigade were operating on the Western Front. They are trying to get as much information of the effectiveness of chemical weapons as possible. And British intelligence are sort of working on this anyway, but Davies is really keen to find the evidence. And I mean, there's two reasons. Obviously, it's effectively a field trial of the M device, so it's very valuable information as to the effect of the weapon. But he's also doing what Fawkes had trained his men to do in France, which is to gather as much information as you can of how good your chemical weapons are as part of that internal propaganda within the British Army, so that everyone can see how good chemical weapons are, to fight against the natural disinclination to use chemical weapons. There are getting on for 50 accounts from different named prisoners. We got Private Liposhkin, who 4 bombs fell near him, about 10 yards away, caused him head pains, watering eyes, a sore throat, breathing difficulties, copious vomiting. And he said he was unable to stand. He lay down and was carried into a barracks. And he found that sickness and coughing prevented him from sleeping. And he surrendered 3 days later. And that's kind of typical. So coughing, head pains, but also a sort of psychological impact. Another man said that he surrendered because he found that he was now very frightened of shell fire. And the Blue Cross shells in France had also had a kind of psychological dimension to the effect. It caused a sort of intense feeling of depression. And this has been observed in Porton as well in 1918 on human subjects when they tested it. They found, as well as the intense pain, and at Porton they said that the pain was so intense that this smoke could cause in the sinuses that men had to be restrained from trying to kill themselves. But also it left them with a feeling of hopeless misery as well. So it's very effective. They basically always capture the positions where they use the bomb.